Soviet Union. Okay, for those of you that were here when we watched the great debates for a little period of time on the DVD, one of the things that Kennedy talked about is how our kids were behind in science and math, and alluding to the fact that the Russians were getting the best of us in those core areas. And so that was kind of a campaign issue in 1960, but the race for space really began on October 4th, 1957. So the race for space between the United States and the Soviet Union really began on October 4th, 1957. And what happened on that historic day of October 4th, 1957 is the Soviet Union made history by launching the world's first satellite into space. So on that date of October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union was the one that made history by launching the world's first satellite into space, known as what? Sputnik 1. Okay? So, again, the race for space between the Soviet Union and the United States began on October 4th, 1957, when the Soviet Union made history by launching the world's first satellite into space, known as Sputnik 1, which is on your ID sheet. Now, this was a pretty impressive first, but it frightened America like you wouldn't believe. Okay? Why would this concern America so much that the Russians were able to send a satellite into space? Especially during the Cold War. Why would that concern us? Why would that be a big deal? What? Somebody kind of said something. What did somebody say? Start with the end. Anybody say?
Nuclear weapons.
Right. We were concerned because if they could shoot satellites into space, what would keep them from shooting nuclear weapons into space, especially at us? So this was a very frightening thing for America, especially the government, because the Cold War was at its height, and the military significance of Russians in space really scared us to death, because if they could shoot that satellite into space, they certainly could shoot some sort of weapons, maybe nuclear, at the United States. So we got really nervous. We were trying to scramble to make up for lost time. And what the United States government did, as they scrambled to make up for lost time, is we created something called the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, better known as NASA. And that was established in 1958. So to scramble to make up for lost time, the United States government created what's known as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, better known to you as NASA. Okay? National Aeronautics and Space Administration. NASA was established in 1958 by the United States government. Again, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Now, the first program that NASA, and that's the last time you'll hear National Aeronautics and Space Administration, we'll go with NASA from this point on. But the first space program that NASA got themselves involved in was called the Mercury Project. The Mercury Project. So in 1958, because of this Sputnik 1 going into space on the part of the Russian government, the United States got nervous, and so they made up for lost time by establishing the organization we know as NASA in 1958, and their first space program is going to be called the Mercury Project. Now, before we could even get that really going off the ground too much, the Soviets all of a sudden made another first. And that occurred on April 12th of 1961. April 12th of 1961, the Soviets made another first. And what they did is they sent a cosmonaut, that's what they call them in Russia, not astronaut, a cosmonaut into space, and he orbited the Earth. So that was a huge concern. So on April 12th, 1961, the Russians sent the first human being into space to orbit the Earth. His name was Yuri Gagarin, which is on your ID sheet. So, as we're trying to get the Mercury Project and NASA's trying to get established, during that time, on April 12th of 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human being to orbit the Earth. He became the first human being to orbit the Earth. Some details about his trip. His trip lasted 1 hour and 48 minutes, and he circled the globe one time, 203 miles above the Earth. So Gagarin's trip lasted 1 hour and 48 minutes, and he circled the globe one time at a distance of 203 miles above the Earth. Now I have a Soviet watch here that is replica of the period, and it's got a picture of Yuri Gagarin in the watch, which was kind of the significance that he was the hero. So this is a Soviet timepiece with Yuri Gagarin's picture in the circle. So he is a very important person in Russian history. We'll talk about him later. But the problem was, this gave the United States, or excuse me, gave the Soviet Union a 2-0 lead over the United States in the race for space. So we're down 2-0. And people in America are quite nervous. So NASA's got to step up their game, because we're down 2-0. Now, who inherits NASA? Who inherits it? Go ahead. Kennedy. President Kennedy inherits NASA when he takes the oath of office in January of '61. And I'm going to tell you a story. History tells you that he wholeheartedly supported the Mercury Project after he took office. History will tell you that. But secretly, he was concerned about the money it was going to cost, and he thought really that money should be spent better elsewhere. But he had to get behind it because we were down 2-0. So if you read that Kennedy was wholeheartedly behind NASA and the space program, especially the Mercury Project, that's probably true. But he confided in aides, which was found out later in his aides, that really he was concerned about the money spent for that because he had other programs that he wanted to deal with. But he knew he had to get behind it because we were down 2-0. And he made a bold prediction when he took office. Anybody know what that bold prediction is? The second thing I wish President Kennedy could have seen in his life other than the Berlin Wall coming down. What did he predict? Man on the moon by the end of the decade. So Kennedy predicted and made the bold statement. He proclaimed that Americans would land a man on the moon safely and return them to Earth safely by the end of the decade. And he said that in 1961, pretty bold prediction at that time because we weren't near as technologically forward as you might think to make a prediction like that. But Kennedy made the prediction. And we did it in July of 1969, which we'll get to. So it took almost the entire time. But he made that bold prediction, and he did get behind the Mercury Project. And that's where we're going to go next is talk about Project Mercury. What did the Mercury space program consist of? That'll be our next subtopic, okay? The Mercury space program. Now, what did you have to find right off the bat? We didn't call them the same as Russians. Had to find astronauts, okay? We didn't have any astronauts. We didn't have anybody that ever went into space or even tried to do that. So, in 1959, during the Eisenhower administration, not during the Kennedy administration, NASA asked the Department of Defense to get them a list of military test pilots that they were going to consider for astronaut training. So again, during the Eisenhower administration, late in 1959, the Department of Defense was asked by NASA, hey, give us a list, a big list of military test pilots that we would like to consider to become astronauts. Okay, because we had no astronauts. And obviously you're going to have pilots do that, and there's pilots in different branches of the service. So NASA got together with the Department of Defense in 1959 during the Eisenhower administration and said, hey, give us a large list of military test pilots that we should consider to be astronauts in this new Mercury space program. Well, the Defense Department responded and gave NASA 508 names of pilots from different branches of the service to be considered. 508. Now, of the 508, 473 received consideration. In other words, the difference between 508 and 473, they just looked at right away and said, nah, not going to work. It's kind of, okay? So they gave them 508 names, but they only considered 473 of the 508 names they were given. And this was kind of like trying out for a basketball team or whatever, of those 473 possibilities, they narrowed that group down to 110. So they cut from 473 down to 110. Now here are the three things that these 473 possible test pilots were evaluated on, right off the bat. Age, they had to be less than 40. So any of those 473 pilots that they considered, if they were 40 years old or over, they were done. And they had to be 5'11" or less. So they took a look at the 473 and cut it down on age, less than 40 years of age, and height, less than 5'11" or less. So Hoyt would have no shot. Why did that matter? Size of the capsules that they're dealing with. And when you get to Washington, D.C., and we go to the National Air and Space Museum, and you see these capsules, because they are there, some of them, you'll understand. Okay? Now, out of those 110 left over, they cut down to 69 and sent them to a briefing in Washington, D.C. So the 110 left over, they cut down to 69 and sent them to Washington, D.C. for a briefing. So what happened when they were in Washington, D.C.? They interviewed them, they tested them, and they asked them, would you like to volunteer for the Mercury space program? So they cut from 110 to 69, sent them to Washington, D.C. for a briefing. They tested them, they interviewed them, and they said, hey, if chosen, would you like to volunteer? So if anybody would have said at that point, nah, this isn't my thing, they would have been gone too. Well, of that 69 they sent to Washington, D.C., 6 were too tall. I don't know how they missed it in the initial cut, but 6 were too tall. 16 said, no, I don't want to be involved. So it left 47 who said, yeah, I'm interested, I meet the criteria so far, and I want to be interviewed. So of that 69 they sent to Washington, D.C. again, 6 were done because they were too tall, and 16 said they were not interested anymore once they got to that point. So now they're down from 508 names they originally got to 47. Well, they cut the 47 down to 32. And they sent them to New Mexico to a special clinic for physical examinations. So of the 47 who volunteered in the Washington, D.C. cut, 32 were picked, and they were sent to a medical clinic in New Mexico for physical examinations. What were the main thing these physical examinations were to see how they handled what? Stress. Okay, it was a stress test, basically, because it's going to be stressful to be involved in this initial program. So these 32 test pilots were asked to continue the program. They reported to a medical clinic in New Mexico. They had physical examinations that were used to determine how each man handled physical stress. Well, after they did their stress evaluation, they put them through psychological testing also. So after a week of physical examinations in which they test their stress level, so to speak, after a week, they also during that time gave them psychological testing. And when all that was done, they picked 7 final astronauts. So when all that was done, they picked 7 astronauts. This is what they were considered. This is how they were chosen. This is more important you know these 3 things. So their being chosen was a combination of these 3 things. So the 7 men that were chosen for 3 things. What do you think one of them might have been? Say it. Somebody said it. Come on, you're getting ahead of the game. Did you say something before that? Oh, did somebody say experience? Oh, they were chosen for their experience. What else might we look at? That'd be in pretty good shape. Their physical fitness and their skill level. So these 7 men were chosen for their experience, their physical fitness, and skill level. The combination of those 3 became known as what, Miss Warner? The right stuff. You ever heard that before? The right stuff? You got the right stuff? That's where that expression came from, is from the selection of the Mercury astronauts. So the 7 men that were chosen out of 503 names they started with were chosen for their experience, skill level, and physical fitness, a combination they referred to as the right stuff. Once chosen, these men became known as the Mercury 7 astronauts. They went down in history known as the Mercury 7 astronauts. So they were chosen for their experience, skill level, and physical fitness, a unique combination known in history as the right stuff. And these 7 men became known in American history as the Mercury 7. Now, they actually became what in American history? What did they kind of become? Nobody knew who the heck they were prior to this. They kind of became what? Hero, well, at first celebrities, because they hadn't done anything yet. So these guys really were revered as the first new breed of American celebrities. They became almost movie starish, because they were on the news, you know, at television now, and people knew who they were, and they knew the process. So these guys became pretty famous guys, celebrities. Okay, they may become heroes, or will after they fly, but right now they're celebrities. And these guys developed a great camaraderie among themselves. They really got along well, became very good friends. Okay, so the camaraderie that was developed between these original Mercury 7 astronauts was quite astonishing. Got along very well. And they're each planning on taking a flight into space, and they're going to give their capsules a nickname. And each nickname, to show their camaraderie, each nickname is going to end with the number 7. Okay? So to show their camaraderie and their togetherness in this thing, they all made the decision that when we name our spacecraft and our flight, we'll always end each one with the number 7, so it shows that we're all in together, all 7 of us. Okay, I'll tell you who they are. They came from 3 different branches of the military. Here are your Mercury 7 astronauts. I believe they are all on your ID sheet. You just need to kind of note things I tell you. I'm going to tell you the first 3 who came from the United States Air Force. United States Air Force. First, Captain Gordon Cooper Jr., who was 34 at the time he was chosen. United States Air Force, Captain Gordon Cooper Jr., age 34. Second, this guy right here, Captain Donald Deke Slayton, age 35. Captain Donald, nicknamed Deke Slayton, age 35, United States Air Force. And the final, and you'll hear more about him later, Captain Virgil Gus Grissom, United States Air Force, age 33. Captain Virgil Gus Grissom, age 33. Those were the 3 Mercury 7 astronauts from the United States Air Force. Okay, the next branch, United States Navy supplied 3 of the Mercury 7 astronauts. United States Navy. Lieutenant Alan Shepard Jr., age 35. Commander Alan Shepard Jr., age 35. They are Navy pilots.
Commander, not lieutenant? You said lieutenant.
Lieutenant Commander, yeah. Lieutenant, LT period will be good. So Lieutenant Alan Shepard Jr. Second Navy pilot selected was the fellow up on the wall here, Lieutenant Scott Carpenter, age 33. This guy right here. Scott Carpenter, age 33. Navy pilot chose as one of the Mercury 7 astronauts. Scott Carpenter, age 33, lieutenant. And the final Navy pilot that was chosen was Lieutenant Walter Sharara Jr., age 36. Lieutenant Walter Sharara Jr., age 36. Those were your 3 pilots from the Navy. Shepard, Carpenter, Sharara, Jr. Which leaves how many?
1.
And the most famous that you've had to have heard of, here's a picture of him right here. Who is that? Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn, Jr., age 38.
What branch was he from?
What do you think? I'm going to ask you. What do you think? Marines. Very good. And from the Marine Corps pilot, Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn, Jr., age 38. There's kind of a story behind that picture. So United States Marine Corps, Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn, Jr., age 38. Those are the Mercury 7 astronauts. John Glenn later became a senator from Ohio. And during one of our trips to DC, I called him in advance and asked if he would meet with our students because of the class, and he would not do that. Very politely declined because he had enough people from the state of Ohio that wanted to see him, and politically probably wouldn't be great if he met with somebody from Montana. But he was very nice. He said, well, I'll send you a picture if you'd like signed. I said, that'd be great. He said, do you want a senatorial picture or do you want a picture from the Mercury Project? I said, I'll take the Mercury Project. So that's a picture that John Glenn sent me. I was really disappointed our kids didn't get a chance. So, Lieutenant Colonel John Glenn, Jr., 38 years old. Okay, any questions? Anything you missed on the 7?
What's the age of Scott Carpenter?
Scott Carpenter was 33. Okay, who's the oldest? Who's the senior member? Glenn. Very good. Okay, go ahead. What's that? How old was Alan Shepard? 35. Okay, now, what we're going to do now is take you to each of their flights and tell you what happened. So one of these guys is going to be lucky and he's going to be the first American in space. Not going to be the first human in space because Yuri Gagarin's already won that award. So one of these